This Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. Pleased to have with us the Maricopa County Attorney who has been in office since November of 2010.
You say that like it was a long time ago.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Yes.
Bill Montgomery, our guest on Newsmaker Saturday. Great to see you.
Thanks, John.
It's been a while since we've chatted and a lot's happened. One of the issues that we've paid particular attention to is this issue of distracted driving, which you have also taken up as well with the unfortunate death of Salt River Police Officer Clayton Townsend. By all accounts in the DPS reports, he was killed by a distracted driver, and we'll show you that man. He is 40-year-old Jerry Sanstead of Scottsdale. We have video of him. This is right on his release from downtown. He is charged, but there is some discrepancy over what may have happened. It was originally reported that he was texting his wife that night, that he struck Officer Townsend, that he was a classic case of a distracted driver on his cell phone texting. Now some of that's in dispute. He's taken that back. I guess initially he told officers that. I know this is under litigation, but you have asked DPS to go back, right, and take a look at this case and make sure they got it right.
Well, what we've done in this case, and it's not unusual for a vehicular crime, this was one of my first major crimes assignments in the office, that when you have a vehicular collision with a fatality, there are collision reconstruction components of that requires additional forensic analysis and review. It can get down to trying to figure out exactly what the speed was at a particular point in the road. When did braking occur, if ever? If not, when did the vehicle finally come to a stop? All that gets factored into time-distance equations.
So you go back over the phone, find out the timestamps of text.
Well, and that is one other element then when we're now talking about distracted driving and we're looking at smartphones in order to try to verify when was the last time it was accessed, when was the last time there may have been any data entry, was there a phone call outgoing, incoming. These are all the elements now that have to be brought together in order for us to successfully prove a case. And it's not as simple as even someone saying, well, you know, I might have glanced down at my phone. Well, what's the difference in glancing down at your phone, glancing at your radio, or maybe glancing off to another side of the highway, just doing regular scanning as a driver?
We're grappling with this, not only here, but nationwide.
Yeah, it is.
But I'm curious, on a timestamp, on a text, on a phone, you may know this, I don't. When it says 8:54 and there's a text there, does it break it down inside the phone even further, right down to the second?
If I told you that, John, we'd have to go outside. I don't want to get into the specifics of that.
But can you forensically really get exact with that kind of stuff?
In general, we're dealing with minutes. And so depending upon what the circumstances are and what we can objectively determine, you could still get to a point where you may have a really good date timestamp, but because of the plus or minus either side of that, and when something happens, that's where that additional investigation and trying to put together all the circumstances.
Do you think it's tough to legislate this kind of thing on distracted driving?
It is because there's two different things here, John. One is whether or not we should legislate because we want to send a message as a community, and the law as a teacher. I think the governor
just did that by signing that distracted driving law.
Right. And then the second thing is, okay, we've got that law in the books now. Now it gets down to if someone does commit an offense, how well can we investigate, and then how successfully can we prosecute?
Do you think it's tough?
Well, I think it could be tough.
Is this one going to be tough?
Well, it's still under review.
Why manslaughter?
Because of the mental state required to prove it. It's a degree of recklessness that's less than second degree, which...
Not intent.
Correct.
No intent involved.
And I dare say that that probably as a category of offenses, most, not all, but most distracted driving scenarios, doesn't involve someone intentionally seeking to cause injury or harm to another human being.
Right.
That's what makes it so difficult to try to deal with and so tragic.
Let me ask you about something that's caught my attention. I was going back through the records. Arizona is considered a pretty strong death penalty state. We have not executed anyone in this state now since July 23rd, 2014. It's been 5 years. Now, we know that we had the lethal injection cocktail of drugs that was under review and really caused hangups. But we're putting a lot of people on death row, right, out of Maricopa County. Why are we not going forward with this? If that's what the public wants.
Well, we're probably averaging anywhere between 4 and 6 capital trials a year right now in Maricopa County. We're averaging about as many notices of intent to seek the death penalty. We're way down. At one point, we were about 160 death penalty cases.
I was going to say,
we're less than 50.
Harvard University, their Fair Punishment Project, they said Maricopa County prosecutors from 2010 to 2015 sought a higher ratio of death sentences than 99.5% of the counties in the United States.
Yeah.
You guys were at the top of the heap.
Well, and I would just say, too, that Harvard professor has a particular ideological bent and didn't bother to contact me to find out things like, why do we file notices of intent to begin with? Our criminal rules of procedure require me that if we're going to file the notice, we have to file within 60 days of that initial arraignment. And if we don't, we can't go back and file it
So
later.
in other words, you're going to go high and then maybe plea it down, or it gives you leverage, too.
Well,
right?
I would say and we don't go the leverage route. I don't think it's ethical or moral for us to charge someone with a capital offense and seek the death penalty if we don't actually intend to go through with it just to get leverage for a plea.
Interesting.
I don't think that's appropriate. What we've been doing with the defense, and I think this has proven very beneficial, is we try to get all the information up front in order for us to make the best decision possible. Now, sometimes it's incomplete information, and so our best decision at that time is to file the notice. But as we go along in handling the case, if we get more information, we've committed to the defense that if it could change our decision, we'll go back and review it. And there are times, there have been dozens of times, John, where we go back and dismiss it.
You believe in the death penalty. You believe strongly in it.
I believe that if we're going to have capital punishment on the books, and we have those cases where it is the unjustified taking of innocent human life under circumstances that Arizona law provides for, then it is an appropriate punishment.
Speak quickly, if you will, about this. There's been a lot of debate over whether putting somebody on death row is actually more expensive to try to seek death penalty than life in prison. There's conflicting data on this.
But we can
I've
solve
always
that.
heard it's far cheaper to actually do life in prison because of all the appellate issues and court costs.
Yeah. And I would say, and we can fix that if we reduce the amount of time it takes to actually impose the punishment and not leave somebody on death row for that amount of time.
Okay, so it has to do with how...
Well, it winds up being opponents to the death penalty, ideologically driven, because very few cases anymore, certainly out of Arizona, allege actual innocence. These are arguments over procedure and rules, and it is that ongoing litigation that draws it out.
Does it give you pause that we've had some innocent people recently in the last few years who were on death row?
Well, I would say...
Although some of the facts in those cases are debatable.
Yeah, well, and that's just it. I think in those instances in which we can point to someone who forensically...
Ray Crone comes to mind.
Yeah, and Ray Crone's the one that we've had in Arizona, where DNA evidence conclusively established he could not have committed that offense. And I've met with Mr. Crone.
Right.
I met with him early on in my term as county attorney, and I wanted to get the lessons learned from him on where he thought we could and should have known that we had the wrong guy in order to incorporate now those kinds of reviews into how we make the decision. Well, it had to deal with being willing to step back and looking at what we thought was objective forensic evidence, the dental evidence that we have.
Right, it was bite marks from him that convicted him.
Right, and avoiding what we call confirmation bias. All prosecutors are trained in this now. Every time we get new information or something that calls into question our assessment of the case, we should pause, not out of a danger of being proven wrong, but out of an obligation to make sure that we've made the best decision we can and that we're pursuing a case for a just result.
I want to digress here for a moment because all of these kinds of issues, they're a little esoteric, but it completely ties back to what we're watching unfold in Washington with Attorney General Barr and how he handled the Mueller report and how much politics enters into judgment, decision-making, conclusions. How do you keep that stuff out of this?
By staying focused on seeking justice. There is no room for political considerations when you're dealing with evidence and you're dealing with objective facts and you're trying to apply the law. Whether it's a civil case or a criminal case, that's what we're obligated to do as public lawyers. My dog in the fight is not that one side should win or lose. It's that justice shall be done.
It's that simple.
But it is, but it's hard.
In your office, I know you guys, sit, and men and women, sit around a table to discuss how you're going to charge in some of these cases, right? There's an open, vigorous debate. And I'm assuming you've got Republicans and Democrats in there. People with all kinds of ideological stripes.
Yeah, and I say, and I don't know. I don't know who on my staff is a Republican or a Democrat. I've never asked, I've never checked. What I care about is whether or not they have the same commitment, the same ethical approach to prosecuting cases, because that's what matters. I've never read a police report where the perpetrator checked someone's voter identification card before they victimized
Do you
them.
think we're backing away in this country from the death penalty? The polling on it is starting to soften a little bit. It used to be very hardcore. People were like, yeah, we need the death penalty. It seems to be kind of eroding the support for it.
Well, you know, the last time I saw any polling on it, it was well north of 50%. And the way I like to compare it is that I bet Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump would have liked to have been north of 50% in the last election. They would have claimed overwhelming support.
You just brought politics right back into it. The governor recently moved to tighten some of the aggravating circumstances that can be the basis for imposing death sentences. He signed a bill into law that cuts 3 of those out. Is this an indication, again, from a Republican governor, that maybe there's a softening on this idea of the ultimate penalty?
Well, actually, and I don't want to shock people watching, but prosecutors worked with the legislature to do that. We identified aggravating factors that were very infrequently used, and so in order to help bolster an argument that is true, that not every first-degree murder has an aggravating factor, we decided to work with the legislature, and the governor signed it into law, as you mentioned, to say, okay, you know what? We're not using these. It makes no sense to leave these on the books and give the impression that walking out of your door and shooting somebody is going to lead to the death penalty.
Can you help me here as we go to break? A one-word answer. Should marijuana be legal?
No.
We're going to talk about that when we come back on Newsmaker Saturday with County Attorney Bill Montgomery. Where is medical marijuana now? Some people have been prosecuted for using extracts of marijuana. We'll talk to the county attorney about it when we come back on Newsmaker Saturday. Back on Newsmaker Saturday with Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery. He has been in that post since November of 2010. You're on your 3rd term, right?
Yes.
And we're going to talk about how long that will continue, because I know you've had some expressed interest in a state Supreme Court position as well. Let's talk about medical marijuana. We've got this Jones case. Medical marijuana was passed by voters in 2010. There are critics of you that say that you're trying to thwart the will of the voter by going after people who are basically living under the law. They claim, hey, you know, I'm doing my medical marijuana and this guy Montgomery's on my case. What do you say to those folks?
I say that they've been unfortunately misinformed, that since 2010, when the voters did approve it, there is a restriction of my jurisdiction to prosecute certain marijuana possession cases, and that's for people who are within the confines of the Medical Marijuana Act. Now, there was litigation involving whether or not the Medical Marijuana Act really could be legal because it's in conflict with federal law, whether or not county employees, consistent with their oath of office to uphold federal law and state law, really could participate in that program.
And then you've got the extract issue.
And then we have the extract issue too. Since those court rulings made it clear, and during them we weren't prosecuting qualified patients who had a valid card and were possessing and using marijuana within the Medical Marijuana Act, we didn't do that then, and we're not doing that now. The extracts, where that comes into play is that depending on the type of the extract, it could fall under different definitions of hashish or cannabis under Arizona law. The Arizona Medical Marijuana Act dealt primarily with the definition of marijuana. So the question then is, if the Medical Marijuana Act only focused on one definition and not others, are those other definitions and then those products or extracts that fall under that definition excluded from the Medical Marijuana Act?
What's the public worry here for you? What's bottom line for me? What's your concern?
Well, and for me in this regard, we're not prosecuting qualified patients who may be using or possessing those other types of extracts because that case is pending before the Supreme Court. So beginning several months ago, when the issue first came to the fore, my guidance to my office and therefore general guidance to law enforcement has been that until that gets resolved by the Supreme Court, we're not taking those cases and we're not prosecuting those
Do
cases.
you want a court fight over this? Do you want to relitigate the voter-approved initiative in 2010?
Well, I'm not in this case. This is a case that came out of a different county. I know we like to think that everything that happens in Arizona happens in Maricopa County,
Right.
but this is one that didn't.
Okay.
So I'm not even involved in that particular case. I'm watching it because that will give me guidance then as a prosecutor on what statutory authority I have. But beyond that, we're in a wait and see
You
posture.
would like it very much if we didn't have these laws on the books.
Well, I would say this. I think that one of the things that I have learned since it was passed is that we do have medicinal benefits from components of marijuana. CBD oil, for example, does have legitimate benefits. The FDA most recently approved a CBD oil-based anti-epileptic seizure drug for children. That tells me that there is a lot of promise in further scientific research. I'm all on board with that. I think there is a large area here where the FDA could work with states that have legalized the medicinal
But full
use.
legalization is not something you want to see.
No, we haven't fully legalized cocaine or heroin to get medicinal benefits.
At the risk of going Oprah on you here, I do wonder if this stems from your background and your father. Because, you know, for people who don't know, you grew up in a hardscrabble area in the barrios of LA. You end up at West Point. Your father ends up in prison for running marijuana in a truck that he drove. Does this go back to that stuff?
No, if I sourced my position out of a personal experience, I think that would be a disservice to the community in general. There's no real way to debate me on that. Instead, my approach to this has been, we currently have laws that make recreational use of marijuana illegal. So if you want to change those laws, you need to make the case why it would be good for our society to have marijuana legal.
Do you think marijuana is a gateway to tougher things? I mean, do you think some of this legalization has, for instance, led to some of the opioid issues we're having?
I think the objective evidence and what addicts will tell you is that, yeah, that was the first drug that they had started to use. But now there's an important caveat to this too, John, is that marijuana today has far higher concentrations of THC than before. So where before you could say it was an open
benign
argument,
Yeah.
Today though, I think it's a very different question, and the answer is very different based on a very different product.
Let me ask you about this. This fascinated me, and we haven't chatted since this all happened, the Kavanaugh hearings. In the middle of all of this, we end up with a Maricopa County prosecutor questioning Christine Blasey Ford before this white-hot hearing. And that woman is Rachel Mitchell out of your office. How did that happen? How much did John Kyle play into that going through you as an emissary? I always thought if Arizona got involved in this has got to be John Kyle as an attorney saying to Bill Montgomery, who do you have?
So this is how it happened. I'm at a National District Attorneys Association conference in St. Louis. I get a call on my phone. It's a DC number. I answer it. There are two staffers from the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Republican staffers, and they're asking me about Rachel Mitchell and whether or not her resume is as good as it looks. And I confirm for them that she's a national expert, regularly lecturing law enforcement prosecutors, on sex assault investigations and prosecutions. And they wanted to know if she would be available to assist the Senate Judiciary Committee in carrying out their duties and responsibilities. That's how it was laid out.
That was how it happened. So they found her. Somebody did. Kyle put. Do you?
John, I don't know.
You don't know how her name originally surfaced.
But here's the thing about Rachel and about a lot of other folks in my office and other professionals here in Arizona. They have national reputations. It would not have been hard for someone to simply Google top sex assault prosecutors or to have reached out to experts in the field to say, who do you know as a prosecutor? Because Rachel has a relationship with other doctors and professionals in that area.
She was in a no-win situation in that hearing. She basically did the questioning because they didn't want a lot of white Republican men questioning her. It would have looked unseemly.
Well, there's that political facet to it, but the other side to it is this. If you're going to have someone question an individual who is presenting themselves, and now I'm not saying she is or she isn't, but presents themselves as someone who's been a victim of sexual assault, do you want a politician doing it or do you want a professional?
Okay. Were you proud of how she handled it? Because she got a lot of heat over that performance. I mean, they skewered her on Saturday Night Live. It was, I mean, I wondered later if she thought, what the heck did I even bother with this for?
Well, and you know, we talked earlier about keeping politics out of the prosecution function. And Rachel went in there to do a very specific job, to ask questions, not just of Dr. Blasey Ford, but also of Judge Kavanaugh, and to ask specific questions of someone who presented as a sex assault victim, and then ask questions of someone who'd been accused of being a perpetrator of it. And that's exactly what she did. And for folks who want to see what a professional prosecutor looks like in that setting, I would say that
they got
at that time, absolutely.
You're happy with how she performed?
Oh, she did her job.
You talked about people with national reputations in your office. Now, unfortunately, you've got a guy there, Juan Martinez, who you've defended, but Juan Martinez obviously best known for the Jodi Arias case. But he's had these, he's been dogged by these allegations of sexual harassment, allegations which include making inappropriate comments, law clerks, sexual nature of these comments, engaging in unwanted touching. You know the whole deal. You've stuck by Juan Martinez pretty hard. He was a prosecutor of the year in your office at one point.
And what I have done, John, with Juan is what I would do with any other employee in my office. If I expect them to treat defendants fairly and to abide by due process, then I should set that example. And where we have wrongdoing, where it has been established within the office, we take an appropriate sanction. Most of what you mentioned right there came from an internal investigation that we did that was provided to the state bar to assist them in conducting their own investigation to determine whether or not there should be discipline imposed. And that's how this process works. If I jump the gun, if I respond to headlines and external criticism, then sort of the message I'm sending to my prosecutors is that objective evidence, fair investigations, and due process only matter unless it doesn't matter.
A couple of things I want to get to before we're running out of time, but I want to get to, we have all these crazy police pursuits where people under the gun, not literally, but sometimes, police are pursuing them. They take off. We saw one on I-17 recently. This Ryan Begay taken into custody. They did a pit maneuver on him, facing aggravated DUI and unlawful flight. We have been wondering in the newsroom, we're going to dive into this at some point, what happens to these folks when they run from cops? Is it an aggravating factor that really tacks on serious time on what they're already facing?
Yeah, well, right now, an unlawful flight from a law enforcement vehicle is a Class 5 felony. If it's your first offense, the presumptive sentence is 1.5 years. You know, is there more that we can do there? You know, these are, again, some of the cases.
Running from cops is serious business.
Yeah,
I mean,
and this is, you know, something that I remember talking about, again, when I first started off handling these types of cases. We've been all over the board trying to figure out what do you do in order to have a sufficient charge and penalty that would deter someone from running in the first place.
You've got to go down to the legislature. That's
well, we'd have to go down to the legislature for that. But then you're talking about people, they're fleeing law enforcement because they've already done something really bad.
We've got
they don't want to get caught.
About 40 seconds left. Your interest in being on the Arizona State Supreme Court, you've expressed it. You basically put in your application. Does that mean you are finished as county attorney after this term?
Well, there's one more potential vacancy, and after that would be the hard stop where I need to make a decision one way or the other.
Is your heart still in it, being county attorney?
Oh gosh, I love going to work and doing the job, John. People don't know how many great men and women are working in that office every single day. Yeah, we've got 1,000 employees now. And every day I go to work, I get a chance to make sure that the right thing happens.
Is there any other office you're interested in?
No.
So it's Supreme Court, State Supreme Court, or bust. You go back to private practice.
That might be one possibility, or maybe I get my own show.
Bill Montgomery, a pleasure.
Thanks,
as
John.
Always. Good to see you.
Good
Bill
to see you,
Montgomery, County Attorney for Maricopa County since November of 2010. We're back in a moment on Newsmaker Saturday. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Special thanks to Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery for being my guest this week on Newsmaker Saturday. If you want to connect, love to talk to you on Facebook and on Twitter. It's easy, John Hook Fox 10. And we will see you next week on Newsmaker Saturday.